special agent certified to kill. Well, Israel has dozens of James Bonds, maybe hundreds. Young, tough, smart. They travel the world and they kill. They're in the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. For the intelligence force of a small nation, the Mossad has a mystique and reputation equal to that of our CIA and the Soviet KGB, a worldwide network that has the cooperation even of governments that don't recognize Israel. In fighting terrorists, the Mossad works very closely with Israel's elite military units. Here with the second part of tonight's report is Geraldo Rivera.
You've already heard about some of the battles, but what you're about to see is an aspect of Israeli strategy you've probably never heard about. It's the secret side of the unholy war, the battlegrounds of which have reached to the capital cities of Europe and the Middle East. Action, reaction, terror, counter-terror, an eye for an eye. Item, Israel, May 1972. A three-man suicide squad unleashes a random attack on civilians at Lod Airport. 26 are killed, 76 wounded, including a large group of religious pilgrims from Puerto Rico, who happened to be in a bad place at the worst time. It was an early example of international terrorism at its most obvious. The attack was planned by Palestinians, executed by members of the Japanese Red Army, who had trained at camps in Lebanon, who had used weapons made in Czechoslovakia, personally delivered by Carlos, a well-known terrorist from Argentina. The only killer to survive was Kozo Okamoto. He didn't lose his life in the attack, but he has certainly lost his mind in prison. Okamoto now identifies exclusively with his Israeli captors. He circumcised himself in prison and now answers only to the Israeli name of Yossi. Item, Beirut, June 1972. The Israeli target, Ghassan Kanafani, a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which had taken responsibility for the Lod airport attack. Kanafani helped plan it, so an Israeli hit team blew him to pieces, killing his 17-year-old niece in the process. Item, Munich, September 1972. A six-man squad from the Palestinian terror group called Black September takes 11 Israeli athletes hostage during the Olympic Games. They demand the release of 200 terrorists in Israeli prisons, including Kozo Okamoto. The group is transported to the airport, where the German police open fire. Disaster follows. All 11 Israeli athletes are killed. The bodies return to a nation in mourning. The dead terrorists are transported to Libya, where they're received as martyrs and accorded full military honors. Munich was the tripwire. Israel decides to fight terror with terror. In the Israeli Knesset, Prime Minister Golda Meir says, "We will chase them wherever our hands can reach them." Israel draws up a hit list. At its top, Ali Hassan Salameh, operations chief of Black September, architect of the Munich massacre. But before the Israelis could even begin to hit back, Black September strikes again. Item, Brussels, September 1972. An Israeli undercover agent is wounded in this cafe. Black September claims credit. Item, London, 8 days later. Dr. Amy Shahori, the Israeli agricultural attaché, dies after opening a letter bomb. The Israeli counterattack begins. Item, Rome, October 1972. Black September's man in Italy, Wiles Waiter, working undercover as a translator at the Libyan embassy, is followed into his courtyard by an Israeli agent and is shot 8 times on his doorstep. Item, Paris, December 1972. Black September's man in France, Dr. Mahmoud Hamshari, is killed when a bomb placed under his telephone table explodes. The unholy war continues. Item, Bangkok, 20 days later. Black September invades the Israeli embassy. After holding hostages for 36 hours, they leave for Cairo, when safe passage is guaranteed by President Sadat. Item, Madrid, January 1973. Baruch Cohen, the Mossad station chief, is gunned down. Israel mourns, then retaliates. Item, Paris, April 1973. Black September's weapons chief, Dr. Basil al-Kubaisi, is killed by the Mossad. The counterattack is just beginning. Item, Paris, June 1973. Mohamed Boudia, another PLO operative in France, is killed instantly when his car blows up. Item, Beirut, April 1973. Yosef El Najjar, Arafat's chief deputy in charge of Black September, his right-hand man, Kamal Adwan, and Kamal Nasser, at the time chief spokesman for the PLO, are marked men, targets of Israel's most ambitious attack on the leadership of the PLO. Israeli General Mano Shaked was closely involved.
The leaders had to be hit in order that they will vanish from the area. And the soldiers had to be hit in order that they will not come to our border and hit our people. That's all. It's a horrible thing, that what I'm saying, but this is the job that we had to do, and we did it.
This is part of the actual Israeli raiding party bound for Beirut. It was composed of an elite unit, including a group not unlike these frogmen we taped recently on Maneuvers. The actual group left Israel at about noon, transferring to rubber boats like these. Upon landing on a beach in Beirut at about 9 in the evening, the raiders were picked up in these cars, which had been rented by 6 secret agents who had arrived in Beirut 3 days earlier.
You had to penetrate to 3 apartments in the middle of the night, in which 3 families lived, and you had to go in, to break in, to choose the man or the husband or the father and to kill him. It's not a light job, because as I told you, our soldiers are not killers. And it's very difficult to give an order, such an order, to look into his eyes and to tell him, you have to climb 6 stories to penetrate an apartment, and on the second room on the right, you have a man, an invisible enemy, and you have to kill him.
2020 has obtained the actual maps and charts prepared for the operation by the Mossad, Israel's secret agents. They show in exhaustive detail the pinpointed targets. 3 are the homes of the PLO leaders. The 4th, a PLO barracks. The 5th, an explosives factory. Also included are the precise route from the landing zone and a detailed layout of all the targets. From the Israeli point of view, the raid was a clean sweep. During the night, they succeeded in killing all 3 leaders and 80 PLO soldiers. Israel lost 2 dead and suffered 2 wounded. The raiders were back in Israel by dawn.
These raids show that when you have good intelligence, outstanding elite soldiers, devoted soldiers that know exactly and believe in what they are going to do, you can wait almost anywhere in the world.
Almost anywhere in the world, a frame of mind that leads to the raid on Entebbe. Item, a top-secret airbase in Israel, July 4th, 1976. In film never before released, the Prime Minister and other top officials spot the airplane they've been waiting for, carrying the 78 rescued Israeli civilians, who had been held in captivity for the last week. Israel had used its most secret and elite commando unit for the raid. It had been led by one of the country's best soldiers, 30-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Netanyahu, veteran of the Beirut raid, and dozens of others. He, ironically, was the only Israeli soldier to die. Here is a portion of the actual radio transmissions received at headquarters in Israel. It was a legendary raid made possible by daring soldiers supplied with up-to-the-last-minute intelligence, information obtained by Israeli agents on the ground at the Entebbe airport. The Israelis had been meticulously prepared. They even used an exact duplicate of the Ugandan dictator's limousine and an Idi Amin look-alike to fool the Ugandan guards posted at the airport. What happened during the rescue is fairly well known. Why it happened is not. It was planned by the late Wadi Haddad, then Chief of Operations for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Item, Kenya, 1975. It was in revenge for the secret arrest a year earlier of 3 Arabs and these 2 Germans who had used these false passports to enter Kenya, where they intended to use this Russian-made rocket launcher to shoot down an El Al airliner. After their arrest, the government of Kenya had allowed the 5 terrorists to be smuggled secretly to Israel, where they were later sentenced to 10 years in prison. The 2 Europeans were released from jail just last December after pressure was applied by the German government. The 3 Arabs are still imprisoned. Item, Lillehammer, Norway. Ali Hassan Salameh, planner of Munich and #1 target on the Mossad's hit list, remains at large. The Israelis wanted him so badly, their eagerness resulted in 2 grave mistakes. Their agents killed the wrong man. He was a Moroccan waiter working in Norway, and they got caught and convicted of murder. Ali Hassan continued to elude them, boldly accompanying Yasser Arafat, chairman of the PLO, to the United Nations in New York City in November of 1974. Item, Beirut, January 1979. The 7-year score is finally even when Salameh and 4 bodyguards are blown to bits by an Israeli-placed car bomb. The 5 are still together in a Beirut graveyard the Palestinians have set aside for their heroes of the unholy war. The unholy war is usually seen as being fought between Israelis and Arabs, Jews and Muslims. But the fight is bigger than that. Terror is malignant, it spreads, and it's already infected countries throughout Europe.
And in Lebanon, Israel's northern neighbor, there are 1 million Christians caught up in the terrorist war. We'll have Geraldo's report on their agonizing and bitter involvement and its meaning to America in a moment. Why should Americans care if terrorists operate thousands of miles away? Well, because terrorism is a malignancy. It invades and infects nations, destroying them without warning. That's why our government leaders have expressed concern about Soviet support of it. Terror has destroyed Lebanon to the north of Israel. Until a few years ago, Lebanon was a country that accommodated Christians, Jews, and Muslims in peaceful coexistence. Terrorism has torn that nation to pieces. Geraldo continues.
The terror there started in 1975, but some Lebanese are still battling against it. A force that consists basically of Lebanese Christians has been fighting to keep the PLO and its Syrian allies from taking over their country. As a matter of fact, some of the heaviest fighting of the war has happened within the last 24 hours. Because of why it started and how it's being fought, we think it's another front of the same unholy war. Beirut, Lebanon, once the cosmopolitan playground of the Middle East, until all-out war split this city in two and shattered this nation into fragments, each dominated by a different group: Christian, Palestinian, and Syrian. Originally, the Syrians were invited in to keep peace, but the Lebanese Christians charge they've become an occupying army, influenced by the Soviet Union, allied with the PLO, intent on taking over Lebanon. Beirut, 1981. By day, it's like living in the eye of a hurricane. Nerves are kept on edge by cadres of armed men, frequent military checkpoints, and the awesome devastation of war. Four Palestinian refugee camps encircle the Muslim side of Beirut. With more than 600,000 inhabitants, they're really huge neighborhoods, not unlike the rest of the city, except that they hold approximately 50,000 armed men. Beirut, Lebanon. By day, an uneasy peace prevails, but only by day. At night, Beirut seems the world's most deadly city. To gauge the intensity of the current fighting, we spent time on both the Muslim and the Christian sides of the lines. Cameraman Anton Wilson used the special night scope lens because camera lights would obviously attract gunfire.
You know, piled up. They're very close.
The Muslim side of the line is held by the Syrians and by elements of the Palestine Liberation Army. It includes the downtown hotel district, now a grim and ghostly skeleton. The Holiday Inn, scene of fierce fighting during the Civil War. The Hilton Hotel, newly built in 1975, it has never been occupied. The building is gutted now, and all the furniture and fixtures looted. The action was hotter and much closer on the Christian side. As a matter of fact, it was right next door.
You rolling?
Welcome to a night on the town in Beirut. Nighttime in this once cosmopolitan city used to be punctuated by the sounds of casino gambling and disco music. Now it's a far uglier sound. This city has been at war now for 6 long years. The fight here is basically between Palestinians and Christians, not Palestinians and Jews. But the parallels are so striking, we thought it was all part of the same story. A Christian officer named Pierre was our tour guide. He took us to a rooftop vantage point overlooking the front lines.
Machine guns. Heavy machine guns, actually.
Yours or theirs?
Those are theirs.
How far are the Syrians from where we are right now, or the Palestinians?
In some parts of this position, they are just one street away from us. Now, in this particular position, the Biblos building, there's a square that's less than I would say, 50 yards.
50 yards away. Your enemy is 50 yards from where we are right now.
That's it.
PLO sources in Beirut claim that between 60 and 70% of their total military capability has been tied up in the fight against these Christian soldiers. But it is the tactics of terror and not traditional warfare really at the heart of the unholy war. And one of the weapons of terror is torture. This is a Syrian soldier who confessed to being part of a special torture squad and of personally having tortured 20 people. He was captured recently by the Christian Lebanese forces, who for the first time ever acknowledged that they're holding prisoners and have allowed reporters access to them. One of his torture victims was an internationally known journalist, Salim El-Laousi, a Lebanese Muslim, and the editor of a London-based magazine called The Event. Laousi was kidnapped last March by Syrian forces in Lebanon. He was then tortured to death because he'd been writing articles critical of Syria's occupation of part of his country. Just months before his death, he wrote, quote, "If tomorrow Syrian military intelligence succeeds in executing my death sentence, my wife and daughters will take comfort in the fact that I have loved my country and remain loyal to my profession." You're about to meet one of the men who killed him.
What did you do to him?
شملته.
في غرفة مخصصة للتعذيب.
There's a special room for torture. We hit him, and then we stuck wires, electricity in him.
You stuck electric wires in his body?
Yes. The lieutenant said, he told Salim El-Laousi, I'm going to burn that hand with which he used to write. And he ordered them to take his right hand and plunge it in acid.
And you did it?
Yes.
You mean torture is an ordinary part of the business of running the army of Syria?
Yes. Even for the Syrian people.
Torture?
Yes.
Are you a man or an animal?
When a man is allowed to remain human, then he remains human. But when he is supposed to become a beast, then he becomes a beast.
This woman is 21 years old. Her PLO code name is Lady of the Night. Last November 10th, she detonated 2 car bombs within 20 minutes of each other, killing 9 Christian civilians while injuring 69 others.
What were you told to do?
He told her to press on a button and the car would explode.
But what I can't understand is why you did it. You knew there was a bomb in the car. You knew the bomb would explode if you pushed the button. You knew that innocent people would be around. Why did you do it?
She used to fight in the area here, and in order to frighten everybody a bit more, she did that operation.
Sheikh Bashir Gemayel is the commanding general of the Christian Lebanese forces. Outside of Israel itself, this 33-year-old man is the PLO's most formidable enemy. His family has also been the victim of terror. Last year, his 18-month-old daughter Maya was killed, along with 2 bodyguards, when Gemayel's booby-trapped car exploded. The bomb, which he maintains was rigged by the PLO, had been intended for him. The youngest son of one of Lebanon's oldest families, Gemayel has done something that until recently was thought impossible. By political persuasion and by force of arms, he's united most of the country's Christians. He now commands 25% of the country, and over 1 million people. As such, he's more powerful than Lebanon's central government. It is his forces, and not the official Lebanese army, which holds the line against the Syrians and the PLO in Beirut. The real core of Jamail's strength, though, lies in the mountains. This is the country's Christian heartland. War and terrorism are not new enemies for the Christian minority here in Lebanon. These mountains have been their traditional refuge for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, ever since the Muslim conquest of the Middle East, almost 1,300 years ago. So as in Israel, history, recent and ancient, lies at the core of this bitter conflict. Jamail's army is financially supported by Christian Lebanon, by relatives living abroad, and by the Israeli government, which obviously welcomes the fact that it finally has an effective ally in the fight against the PLO. Like Israel, Jamail shares the view that the PLO is a terrorist organization, occupying part of his country and killing his people.
Do you have any idea of how many casualties your people have suffered?
Among the Lebanese Christians and or Muslims, we have had 100,000 killed. 100,000 killed among civilians. And for the fighters, as far as the Lebanese forces are concerned, we have 4,000 of our best fellows who were killed in the fight.
That's amazing. 100,000 killed in a population of just over 2 million?
Yeah.
I mean, how can the nation sustain that kind of bloodshed?
With faith and confidence and motivation, because we don't have the choice.
In Beirut, Sheikh Bashir explained his anger at America's foreign policy.
Beirut was the center of banking for the U.S. companies. Beirut was the best place even for the cultural activities of the Americans in the Middle East. We were the basis of the action of the Americans in the whole Middle East. And I think that this is why we were destroyed. This is why the Soviet Union and the Palestinians and the Syrians, who are becoming more and more the Cuba of the Middle East, this is why they have been putting Lebanon as a target for them. Until now, the U.S. public opinion don't know that we are fighting the same combat and the same fight for the same values and the same interests.
As the United States?
As the United States.
Do you think America's foreign policy has been too complacent? Do you think that the United States has been too far removed from what's going on? And do you think that that attitude has led to an expansion of terrorism?
Let me give you an example about what happened with the U.S. themselves. Their former ambassador to Lebanon, Francis Milloy, 3 weeks after he arrived to Beirut, he was kidnapped by the Palestinians and assassinated by the Palestinians with his 3 bodyguards. His body was thrown in the garbage, and few days later, the body was found by the Palestinians as by chance or by miracle. The body was repatriated to America, and few days later, the president of the U.S. have sent a cable to Mr. Arafat, calling him President Arafat, thanking him for all the help provided in the Milloy affair. So I guess that it was the best encouragement who may be given to the Palestinians in order to proceed and to go ahead with their terrorism against your interest and against your national interest and against your representatives all over the world. I think that it's more than complaisance, it's maybe complicity.
And Ambassador Malloy's death was just one of well over 100 American diplomats and civilians killed in just the last 8 years by acts of Palestinian terrorism.
So we started this by talking about Soviet involvement in world terrorism. Now, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, would have existed whether or not the Soviets were in the act. To what extent, if any, do the Soviets have control in this activity?
There's no evidence that I know of to suggest that the Soviet Union actually controls international terrorism. There's no headquarters in Russia of terrorism where the KGB tells the PLO or the Red Brigades or the Baader-Meinhof gang where and who to hit next. But the evidence is very clear that the Russians are financing, training, and supplying groups that use the tactics of terror. And the Russians don't do anything out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it because every time the fabric of a democratic country is weakened by acts of terror, that serves the Soviet dream of world revolution.
3 days after he took control of Russia, that was in 1917, Lenin said, "Let the people's terror begin."
Thank you, Geraldo.
The latest ceasefire in Lebanon ended a fierce battle that raged for most of the day on the outskirts of Beirut's airport. Israeli tanks and troops battled PLO guerrillas onto the airport runways in the worst fighting in 10 days. But late in the day, U.S. envoy Philip Habib managed to bring about a new truce after a meeting with Israeli Defense Minister Ariel Sharon. The latest advance put the Israelis just 500 yards from a PLO stronghold near the airport. Israelis now control all the routes into West Beirut, and Lebanon's prime minister says the situation is desperate. There are reports of panic buying, and Israelis are said to be keeping out food shipments. However, Israel's prime minister is remaining firm on his demands.
Let them take the Kalashnikovs. We are not afraid of them. And let them go. Let them leave Beirut and Lebanon. We shall not tolerate even one terrorist in Lebanon.
Meanwhile, Israel had to contend with more problems on its occupied West Bank, where Palestinians protested against Israeli involvement in Lebanon. Support for the Palestinian cause was voiced tonight at a Los Angeles rally. Larry Carroll was there and has a report.
It was an emotional evening for the 200 or so who gathered at the Ukrainian Cultural Center. Few, if any, were Ukrainian. There were Iranians, Lebanese, American Jews, and Palestinians, among others, all in support of the Palestinian cause in the struggle with Israel. The rally was informational and intended as a byproduct to raise the hopes of those whose allegiances lie with the PLO forces in West Beirut. Among the speakers, an American doctor outraged after spending 12 days leading a medical relief team in Lebanon.
What we witnessed in 12 days in Beirut was a disgrace to humanity. There is no sense calling it anything less, and I think that what we are witnessing here is a signal to the end of morality in Israel.
Good evening. Ever since Vietnam, proposals to dispatch U.S. troops to foreign combat zones have provoked the most intense debate. So when today the Israelis reported the U.S. offer to send Marines to Lebanon and President Reagan confirmed it, the warning flags began to fly. The offer is to send American forces to oversee an orderly and safe withdrawal of Palestinian guerrillas from West Beirut. White House officials were quick to insist that the president is moving neither recklessly nor hastily. Safeguards against loss of American lives and against widening American involvement would be in place, said the officials. And as Ann Compton reports from Los Angeles, the White House position is that the dispatch of U.S. Marines may well be the only thing at this point that will prevent the Israelis from mounting a final bloody ground attack on West Beirut.
4 days ago, as President Reagan began his vacation retreat, the message came in from Beirut. Negotiator Philip Habib wanted one more bargaining chip. He wanted the promise of American Marines to keep the peace in Beirut. President Reagan's answer came late Friday night, yes. He told aides, if a brief, limited involvement of U.S. personnel is what it takes, I believe we must do it. When the decision leaked out today in Israel, President Reagan wanted his side of the story on the record.
I can report to you that this weekend, in discussions with Mr. Habib, the government of Lebanon told us that a multinational force might be essential for temporary peacekeeping in Beirut, and informally proposed that the United States consider making a contribution to that force. The Lebanese government has not made a formal proposal, but I have agreed in principle to contribute a small contingent of U.S. personnel subject to certain conditions.
That small contingent would be 1 battalion of Marines, up to 1,000 men, fully armed, combat ready, to enter Beirut and escort PLO guerrillas and their weapons out of the city. The Marines, President Reagan believes, would be out in 30 days. Those conditions the president mentioned require that all parties in the Middle East agree to an overall peace plan and that the safety of the American forces be assured. That safety of combat troops may be impossible to guarantee, but the Pentagon is already getting into position. Today, 3 amphibious assault craft were pulled out of port in Italy. When they reach the Lebanese coast tomorrow, they will join what will be a total of 12 combat ships. That's half of all the American fleet in the Mediterranean, 1,800 Marines in striking distance of the Lebanese beaches. Those warships may then be used to evacuate the PLO. From here in Los Angeles tonight, President Reagan has begun to telephone the leaders of Congress. He'll tell them that he'll abide by the War Powers Act, even though he doesn't need congressional consent for the 30-day operation that he has in mind. His real political problems aren't in Washington, they are back in the Middle East. But Habib has assured the president in cables that the promise of an American presence in Beirut is the key ingredient, the essential linchpin without which there may be no peace settlement at all. This is Ann Compton for Nightline in Los Angeles.
There was, in fact, no peace in Lebanon today. The latest 24-hour truce broke down as the Israelis shelled West Beirut, keeping the pressure on the Palestinian guerrillas there. But Jerusalem is still holding off a final ground assault, giving the United States more time to test acceptance of the president's troop plan. A plan that Nightline correspondent Carl Bernstein says has already won some key backing. Carl?
The American initiative is part of what officials of the Reagan administration acknowledge privately is an almost desperate grand design, an attempt, as one White House official put it tonight, of avoiding a bloodbath in Beirut and establishing order throughout Lebanon. The immediate objectives, first, to make it impossible for the Israelis to take any further military action against the PLO in West Beirut, which American officials believe was imminent. And second, to buy enough time to persuade the PLO that it must withdraw its forces and leave the country. Though the plan still sounds very tentative, my conversations today with officials in Washington, Jerusalem, and Arab representatives indicate that there is already broad support from all the parties involved, except, crucially, the PLO. But pressure is being brought to bear on the PLO by moderate Arab states, particularly Saudi Arabia, from which the PLO receives probably a majority of its funding. In Washington, Reagan administration officials confirmed tonight that the French government has agreed in principle to send troops to Beirut, who would join American soldiers in policing a ceasefire while the final arrangements for the PLO's withdrawal are worked out. Publicly, officials involved in the negotiation are saying that before any plan is implemented, it must have the approval of Lebanon, Israel, Syria, and the PLO. But privately, these same officials say, as long as the PLO does not reject it outright, American, Arab, and French intentions are to go forward with its provisions nonetheless. One person who has discussed the matter with the president said tonight that Mr. Reagan would think the odds are 3-2 for American forces soon to be in Lebanon, with only overwhelming congressional opposition or a PLO determination to fight to the death preventing that. The argument is being made by American, Saudi, and European diplomats for the PLO to leave. Though militarily vanquished, the current war has brought about a worldwide consensus that there must be a Palestinian state, American officials believe, and that Israel must become a party to negotiations, bringing that process about. Moreover, the U.S. role in the current negotiations is acknowledged by White House and State Department officials as coming closer than ever to acknowledging recognition of the PLO and its role as the voice diplomatically, though not militarily, of the aspirations of the Palestinian people. It is exactly that role that the Israelis, despite their triumph militarily, sought to destroy. This is Carl Bernstein for Nightline in New York.
Carl, when Deputy White House Press Secretary Larry Speakes discussed this plan with reporters, he made it sound like everyone had to agree on the proposal before American troops went in. Now, you've talked with officials who suggest that the agreement has to be only in principle and details would have to be worked out. It seems to me there's a big difference.
I think there is a difference, and I think there's a lot of buying for time if I read what people are telling me correctly, particularly trying to get the PLO to move. If the PLO can say, we see something in this plan that offers hope that perhaps we can withdraw under these circumstances, that's what the United States, that's what Lebanon, that's what Saudi Arabia is looking for, to avoid this terrible confrontation in Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Carl. An official of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Hassan Rahman, is joining us live now in our New York studios. Mr. Rahman is Deputy PLO Observer at the United Nations, and he's discussed his organization's view of the U.S. troop offer with the PLO leadership in Beirut today. Mr. Rahman, what does the PLO think of President Reagan's offer?
Well, what we know about it, that the Lebanese side in the negotiations conveyed to our leadership the offer by the United States to transport some of the Palestinian military forces out of Lebanon by using the 6th Fleet. To this we said no, because we have an elaborate agreement with the Lebanese government that was made on the 23rd of June and accepted by the Prime Minister of Lebanon, which includes first a ceasefire, which, as you just mentioned, the Israelis have not respected. Second, disengagement of forces and Israeli withdrawal to from 3 to 5 miles, and then the establishment of an international force whose identity is not determined to offer safety and protection for the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon.
Well, Mr. Rahman, with all due respect, the government of Lebanon does not seem to be controlling the situation. You say you have an agreement with them. Israel makes plain that if there is not some agreement that it agrees to, it will storm West Beirut and surely crush your organization there. My question to you is, what do you think of President Reagan's offer to send in U.S. troops to help form a buffer zone and to effect the safe withdrawal of your people?
If that was the case, Mr. Sam, then what government, the President of the United States, needs its approval, if there is no government in Lebanon, as you said?
No, I'm asking whether your organization, the PLO, approves of the President's plan.
Well, what I'm saying that there is an agreement, because we believe that there is a government, there is a Prime Minister, and there is a President in Lebanon, and we are negotiating with the government of Lebanon. You know that we are not negotiating with the United States, and we are not negotiating with the Israelis, because the United States does not negotiate with us. Therefore, the only authority that we speak to is the Lebanese. I refer to the offer that was made by the Lebanese side in the name of Mr. Habib to transport, and it was limited to that, Palestinians or those who will be leaving Lebanon using the Sixth Fleet. To that, we said no, because if the agreement that we have with the Lebanese government is implemented, then we will find our ways to withdraw those forces which would not stay in Lebanon.
Well, Mr. Rahman, other spokesmen for your organization are saying the President's plan is ridiculous, to use their word, that it's completely out of the question. I found it intriguing now tonight that you will not say that. You are clearly not rejecting it.
What I'm saying, that the offer that was made to us by Mr. Habib through the Lebanese government, and that is to transport Palestinians who will be leaving Lebanon by the Sixth Fleet or using the Sixth Fleet, we said no. This was the only offer that was presented to us by the Lebanese side. If there is any other proposal that the United States have, it was not presented to us, and therefore it would be silly for me to comment on a proposal that was not made.
All right. Do you see the United States as being an ally of Israel's in this respect, or do you think that the U.S. can play some role of honest broker?
First of all, I think that the United States so far have adopted the objectives of the Israeli invasion, which makes either implicitly or explicitly the United States a partner to this carnage of civilians in Lebanon. I think that the responsibility of the United States should go beyond that. The responsibility of the United States is, first of all, to ensure that when it tells the Palestinians to leave Lebanon, knowing that they are not Lebanese, and I agree that we have to leave Lebanon, at least to tell us to go to Palestine, which the United States have not said. Second, that the United States' role should not be reduced to supplying Israel with all those weapons, converting Lebanon and the Palestinians and the Lebanese as a testing ground guinea pigs for the latest American weapons. This is second. I don't think that this is a responsible role either. Therefore, so far, the United States have played only this role. If the United States was serious about establishment of peace in the Middle East, then the United States must recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and national independence, and not be accomplice to the destruction of the national aspiration of the Palestinian people through the destruction of the leadership of the Palestinians, namely the Palestine Liberation Organization.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman. And by the way, I don't know who broke the ceasefire in Lebanon today, so I'm not subscribing to the idea that it was Israel. Joining us now, live in our Washington bureau, is Admiral Stansfield Turner, former Director of Central Intelligence, former Commander of NATO's Southern Command, which includes the U.S. Sixth Fleet, and a man well able to discuss the military as well as political ramifications of the President's offer. Admiral Turner, to begin with, do you think it's a good idea to send the U.S. Marines into Beirut?
I think it's a bold plan, Sam. It's a risky plan.
I think the stakes are so high that we should try it. I think the president has a good move here if he can get the right assurances.
But what should those assurances include? An ironclad jot and tittle of all the agreement? Or as Carl Bernstein suggested, should we go in sort of on the come?
I think I'd be very careful about going in on the come as to whether the PLO are ready to withdraw. Because once our troops are in there, the PLO will have a sense of safety that the Israelis will not be able or willing to attack West Beirut. Therefore, they may become even more obstinate as to whether they'll make an agreement to leave Lebanon, to leave West Beirut. I think the stakes, however, are so high for us and for Israel in the Middle East. I think the situation is so much more serious than we've seen it in the media in this country in recent days that we have to push for enough of an agreement to get in and try to pull this off.
All right, put on your former admiral's cap now. How will the Sixth Fleet do it? How will we land the Marines? How will we put them into place? And what will safeguard them?
Well, they will come in by boat and by helicopter, presumably. They will have to take up positions, I believe, as a unit, because if there are only about 1,000 of them, they've got to stick fairly close together to provide themselves self-defense if they should get into trouble, if they should become the middle of the sandwich with people firing at them from both sides. And they will want to be together so that if they have to get out in a hurry, they can force, or rather fight their way to one of these beaches where the ship's boats, the ship's helicopters can come in and extract them in a hurry.
So 1,000 men wouldn't be enough to actually form a perimeter around West Beirut?
No, by no means. They're badly outnumbered on all sides there. They are a symbolic presence when they go in. They deter both sides from recommencing fighting, but if it does recommence despite their presence, they're in a very difficult position, and I would want to be able to move them quickly to the outskirts so they wouldn't be caught in the middle of the fighting.
Well, is that the danger? That they go in and in fact an agreement breaks down or no agreement is reached and fighting commences, and they, as you say, then have to fight their way out?
That's one danger, Sam, but a second danger that really bothers me is that the whole situation will bog down and it won't be 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, but we'll be stuck there for a long time to come, and both sides will blame us for the lack of progress in getting a peaceful solution.
What sort of weapons will the Marines have? What sort of air cover will they have? And how would that be used, Admiral?
Well, we really don't know because we hope they're only going to be a peacekeeping force and that they're not going to be actually actively engaged in combat. Clearly, there are 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean right now, fortunately. Sometimes we have only 1, sometimes 2. Those will be brought up and be ready to provide tremendous air support if needed. But the Marines themselves, I think, will take rather light weaponry with them. They want to be mobile. They don't want to get themselves bogged down.
If we send in Marines, even under the best conditions, are we going to have to be prepared for the loss of a few lives? I mean, doesn't it just happen, accidental shelling or an old shell that explodes?
I don't think that's necessarily a certainty in this case. I do believe that both sides will be very wary at the initial period, at least.
Life in West Beirut, the problems are these. Garbage hasn't been collected for about 4 weeks. The Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts go out every day, try to at least contain some of the garbage, but it's still all over the streets. Drinking water and electricity have been cut off. You have to wait in a long line, 1 pitcher per person per day to get water. The restaurants, the movies, the beaches, they're all closed in West Beirut. There is no gasoline now, and I guess the biggest problem is the fact that there really is no reliable information for the Palestinians who remain in the city.
Tonight, there's a new problem. That is where the PLO is going to go after Lebanon. PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat has said it will be Syria. But tonight in Damascus, the Syrian government said it will not give refuge to the 6,000 or so PLO fighters who are trapped in West Beirut. And there, late today, artillery and mortar duels erupted again between Israeli and PLO gunners. Hal Walker reports on the day's events.
Today's artillery exchanges began unusually light. As the day progressed, the bombardments escalated, including shelling from offshore Israeli gunboats. The heavy fighting continued into the night, with the Palestinian troops responding with Katyusha rockets. Ironically, negotiations on the withdrawal of PLO forces were reported to have moved forward at the same time. Lebanon's Muslim Prime Minister Shafiq al-Wazan crossed the Green Line early today for the first time in a week to join the talks in East Beirut. He said negotiations were nearly complete. PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat's deputy, Hani al-Hassan, claimed that agreement with Lebanon had been reached. He said it includes a Palestinian political and military presence and a call for an immediate UN peacekeeping force to come in. Israel has already flatly rejected a continued PLO presence here. Saif Salam, a Muslim leader close to the talks, earlier had said that the guerrillas no longer insisted on a token presence. A spokesman for the PLO, Mahmoud Labadi, disagreed.
No, this is still has to be negotiated with the Lebanese government.
You're saying that's not true?
There is no final position on that.
The problem with the negotiations at this point may be that they are not so much stymied in willfulness as stalled in confusion. Even those on the same side have trouble reading each other's signals. Meanwhile, the people caught in the middle of the conflict try to go on with their lives as well as they can. Hal Walker, ABC News, West Beirut.
This is John McWethy. Here in Washington, the announcement that Syria will not allow the 5,000 to 6,000 PLO soldiers to settle in its country is seen in some quarters as a major blow to a plan that reportedly was taking shape in Beirut. Sources say the PLO was insisting that its forces not be evacuated by ship, but instead be allowed to walk out of Beirut through the Bekaa Valley and into Syria, where they would settle. The PLO leadership reportedly favored this option because it would allow them to keep their force together. If taken out by ship, proposals call for the Palestinians to be scattered among a number of Arab countries. With a mass march out of Beirut and into Syria now apparently out of the question, the emphasis again shifts to U.S. efforts to draft a plan for evacuation of the PLO by boat. This is seen as a far more difficult option for the Palestinians to accept, but with Syria now apparently slamming the door on its Arab brothers, the PLO may have no other choice. John McWethy, ABC News, the Pentagon.
This is Barry Dunsmore. Senior U.S. officials still believe that the current negotiations in Beirut can be concluded successfully by early next week. Officials here are not dismayed by reports that the PLO is suspending negotiations or that Syria is refusing to accept PLO guerrillas. The U.S. doesn't believe that is